Julien who will discuss the film along with Bill Arning from the Contemporary Arts Museum. Good evening, Bill.
So Julien, I don't think I've seen that since I saw it in the movie theaters. At that point in your career now where you're getting retrospective views, how does a movie about that's so in love with youth culture of a certain period look to you today?
It looks slightly out of focus, actually, but other than that, the colour looked great. I love the sets, you know, that was a wonderful thing to build. Last night I was talking about wanting to be an architect and build whatever I wanted in a movie, and I did achieve it here. It's a kind of magic Jung-like map of Soho with all the best bits jammed together and the bad bits kicked out, you know, so that looks great. It's always a slightly bittersweet thing. I only saw it last year in London in terrible print, actually, the National Film Theatre, so I haven't seen it that often, but it's, you know, I got a big spanking for this movie. I had to leave England, you know, go into exile like Lord Byron and other people, and come to your fair shores, actually. So, you know, it's a mixed emotion.
But it's such a love letter to London too, just the way the streets look, and even though it's dealing with a sort of horrible race riot and other things, there's so much about the spirit of London in it, and the book it's from is part of the London trilogy, which was one of the great London literature set of novels.
Yeah, it's when London became alive. You know, the teenage thing was one part of it, but and all the great music that followed from that. You know, Charlie Watts and people were in that scene, and a few years later, the whole thing exploded worldwide. But it was also about, you know, different cultures coming to London and breaking down the kind of Victorian world we were kind of expected to grow up in. And, you know, the Technicolor of this film is celebrating the end of that old black and white nonsense and, you know, moving into celebrating being alive a bit more.
It seems like, because it was mid-'80s when you were talking about it in the press before it came out and even before it was finished, that it seemed a strange period to do a sort of classic movie musical where the songs really drive the action forward. What possessed you to do a musical?
Well, there's a clue in the book. You know, Colin McInnes talks about Shaftesbury Avenue, which is one of the great theatre streets in the West End of London, and he talks about a night in 1958 where people are floating down the street in a heat wave like gondolas. And he said, someday they'll make a musical about this. And I thought, well, I'm a punk rocker. What can I do to fuck them up, basically? Do something you're not expected to do. And I was in love with Hollywood musicals, really. I mean, I was turned on to them by Godard. You know, all those guys loved these musicals. So I thought, what, you know, you could maybe do a musical about some themes that meant something. You know, it's a spectacle. It's the most pure kind of cinema musical where you just have moving color and dance and music and on a huge, you know, it's even bigger than the Rothkos in the Rothko chapel, this thing. So, yeah, you know, just the chance to use the screen as a kind of painting really is in scope. We shot it at 70mm actually, which it looks great in 70. Or I remember it looking great. You could see all the camera kit that they'd left right at the back of the studio. You know, it was that clear.
Well, having watched The Filth and the Fury, also the dialogue between authenticity and hyper-artificiality goes back and forth. The sort of Malcolm McLaren character as the maestro of artificiality with Johnny Rotten always coming off as authenticity personified, and then you sort of jump to this where in movie musicals the artificial is the value. How did that the artificiality of it all, the fact that nothing looks naturalistic, how did that appeal to your sensibility at the time?
I found, you know, because it was a period just before I came into kind of understanding the city I grew up in, you know, I became aware in kind of 64, 65 of what was going on, and this was just slightly out of reach. You know, I remember crawling under tables at this time, but I didn't see the whole picture. So it's a kind of a dreamscape version of a creation myth for me, in a way.
Well, it's also drawn as a sort of utopic period when gay and straight and black and white were all together in the same clubs, dancing together, and then these outside elements coming in. How does that's coming from the novel also?
Yeah, the novel was a very acute, perceptive reflection of what was going on at the time in London. And as you say, it's part of a trilogy, and there's City of Spades is even more about the breath of fresh air that particularly people from the Caribbean brought to London. You know, we never had tables outside on the street until these guys arrived, you know, and they taught us how to live in our city and taught us how to enjoy being who we can be in a magical way. So I was, you know, partly celebrating that, but you know, I'm not the only one to do that. The Rolling Stones come out of that sensibility too, you know, and the Pistols, and all the great music from London, you know, was so turned on by music from Black America and the Caribbean.
I was also kind of amazed at the amount of music legends that sort of pop up. I didn't notice Sandy Shaw was in it until today.
Yeah, I snuck a load of them in. Actually, I tried to get Helen Mirren to play the mum, and when I couldn't get her, I was like, fuck it. Andy Rice Davis, who was, you know, Christine Keeler's cohort in crime, not really an actress. Lionel Blair was, you know, kind of hate figure. Alan Freeman, you know, it's, I was trying to be irreverent, really, as far as I could. But I did get a big spanking for it.
Can you talk about what the nature of that spanking was?
Well, it's like you're fired off the movie. I didn't finish this movie. It's another thing that makes me a bit sad because you may have noticed there were about 10 editors on the film, and they put a guy on the first part of the movie, a guy on the middle, and a guy on the end, and they didn't talk to each other. And they cut this thing, and they wouldn't let me in the cutting room. It was very, and I was having to do all these because it was a huge thing in England, this film, at the time. It was like the movie that brought down the British film industry. Which, you know, is a mixed blessing, really. But I was having to do like interviews with Melvyn Bragg about this film, and there was like a sound in my ears because I was going mad, like a bee trapped in my ear while I was doing these silly interviews about it. Because I knew I wasn't finishing it, and you know, I knew that they were choosing the wrong takes. They weren't talking to each other. It was a nightmare. Anyway, they couldn't make head or tail of it, and they said you can come in over Christmas. We could release it after Christmas, but we give you 2 weeks over Christmas to edit it, but you can't reprint anything. You can't, you know, you just have to work with what's there. So we got in the edit room, and that opening shot, which was a 4.5 minute shot, they'd cut up into 1,000 pieces, half of which were missing, you know, so we were looking under chairs in the cutting room and trying to find the frames of film, and that took about a week. So we had a week to try and edit this thing, and I've been asked to re-edit it, actually. I don't know whether I could be bothered, but I could see there were better takes at times. You know, it's annoying when you're kicked off a film like this. It kind of haunts you, and the movie was a kind of strange cause célèbre, you know, partly because of the people who were in it. But you know, they were reviewing it before we finished shooting, and you know, there were cartoons in all the national newspapers about this thing. It was hyped, overhyped, which we were really responsible for because we were very young in terms of the kind of ageism of the British film industry at the time, and no one wanted to make this film, so we had to hype it. We had to get it in the record mirror or whatever the guy says, or the face, and then we could shove magazines in front of these guys and say, look, they're interested in this film. You know? But once you let the genie out of the bottle, it's very hard to get it back in, you know. So hyping, I wouldn't talk about anything until you're certain.
You said Julie Burchill reviewed it before it was actually finished, or?
Oh yeah. She stuck the knife. It was like a multiple stabbing, I think. Started in the back and then in the eyes, I think, as far as I remember.
But you were very involved in the process of commissioning the songs for it, because the songs were mainly written for the movie, right?
Yeah, no, that was a great part of the ride for me, was working particularly with Gil Evans, who was just a legendary figure to us. When Charlie Watts came to play the drums on these tracks, the studio was booked from 9 a.m. Charlie would be there at 7:30 waiting outside, to work for Gil Evans, Wow. And Gil would say, you can't keep time, man, you're not fucking good, But he was an amazing, he arranged the great Miles Davis albums of the 50s, and he worked with Jimi Hendrix. He was he drove Ronald Reagan, he had to pick up Ronald Reagan. He was a cab driver in Hollywood in the 20s, so wherever Ronald Reagan spent the night before he was supposed to be on set, he had to hunt him down, or Gary Cooper, and get him to set, so he knew the ways of the world, this guy, and he could certainly arrange music like a shaman.
Can you tell me a little bit about the origin of the great sort of Bowie dance number with him on the giant typewriter and then mountain climbing?
Well, I'd worked with David a bit before, and I knew that he had spent time doing what Keith Richards escaped doing, which was being trained at an art school to kind of do letraset, I think it was called. Advertising. You weren't really studying fine art, you were studying to be someone who sold things to people at that point in England. And there was this character, Vance Packard, who wrote a book called Hidden Persuaders, which McInnes created this Fendis Partners guy on. So having worked with David, I was talking to him about that period in his life, and it seemed to make sense to get him to kind of revisit what he was doing when he left art school. So that's kind of how he kind of was attracted to the role. And he wrote that song, That's Motivation, about that thing of selling stuff to people that they don't necessarily need.
And when you mentioned he was going to cut away and having mountain climbing in the Alps and the other sort of
yeah, sure. He loved that Mount Everest thing. Yeah. That was very difficult, though, that thing of getting him to jump on the world. I think it was about 120 takes. He was insisting he would do it in one go. And these were the old days before you could, do anything you wanted with motion capture or anything. You had to physically
carry him up,
leap up. Yeah, we were totally into that kind of advertising, because in England it was really everything had to look like Sinatra. In the late 50s. They sold cigarettes with guys looking like Sinatra, so David found that very funny, the whole Strand, this cigarette called the Strand. There was a very famous advert in England of a guy wandering really lonely, the only guy alive in London, down by the Thames, and you think he's going to jump in the river, and he lights a cigarette and he feels even worse. So it's like a suicide note, this advertising thing for this brand called Strand, which then folded because everyone thought it was like bad luck charm, this thing, not Lucky Strike.
And how did Ray Davies get involved?
Well, I worked with him too. He's a great, explorer of London too. He's just a magic man, I think. And so it wasn't hard. He was a bit like, should I play the dad? That was Helen Mirren's thing. I'm not old enough to play a mum. So I was lucky to get him to play a dad, but except he was supposed to be a cab driver. And, I think there is a scene in there where he drives a cab, but he turned up and he couldn't drive. He told me he could drive. It turns out he admits he can't drive, so it's like, oh God, what are we going to do? We'll have to push this, hide behind the taxi and push it. I think these people love London, you know, that David and Ray particularly are deeply enmeshed in myths of London.
I think I learned more about London geography from listening to the Kinks obsessively as a teenager than anything else.
Yeah, the Kinks are the guidebook, basically, the Michelin
I'm
guide.
trying to figure out which way for Waterloo Sunset you walk across the bridge to experience the Waterloo Sunset.
Yeah, Monet, or as Ray called him, Money.
So, when you said you ran away to States after this, what was
I
the
didn't run, I was kicked out. I was walking the planet, basically.
So, what was the critical response to the movie when it was released in the States? Because
It was great. It was good in Europe. In Paris, they dug it, and in Italy, and then, you know, those kind of hot-blooded places seemed to go for it. I think it was. I mean, it depends who you talk to. The LA Weekly said it was the best movie ever made, but you know, you're going to believe guys like that? I don't think so.
So, we open up to any questions now, or? Yeah.
Actually, two questions, actually. The first one, just out of curiosity, but the first, I guess, the opening sequence of the movie, was that done in a long shot? And if yes, was that done in one take or multiple takes?
Well, they refer to it in a film called The Player. You know, Robert Altman talks about it, or who was the actor? Tim Robbins talks about it, I think. It's a rip-off of Orson Welles, basically. But, you know, we did it, you know, it was the time that you first got a hold of a Steadicam, really, so you could kind of dream of a guy running and then jumping on a crane and jumping off a crane and doing all sorts of weird shit that isn't totally necessary, but, you know, it's fun to do. But it is, it's not one shot, it's a fake. You know, there are invisible cuts in it. I think 2 of them. But it was great, you know, if you get a shot like that right, you're ahead of the game. You know, what should take 5 days to shoot, you do in an afternoon, which is quite a good thing when you've got these guys breathing down your back.
Was another question? Yeah.
Yeah, first, I'm sorry they didn't like it in England. I was 15 when this movie came out, and I got a fridge for a dresser. I thought, thought this was fabulous. But I've always been curious about, you know, typically when you're doing a musical, there's a creative team that does all the songs. And as you were mentioning earlier, a lot of the songs were written and choreographed by the performers. How did that work? How did you make that into a cohesive film?
Well, you had to, you know, sit down with them and talk it through and why it was what it was meant to do. It was a very exciting, collaborative thing, you know. You know, I had other songs that we didn't use, actually. I'm a lifelong enemy of Elvis Costello because I didn't use his song. In fact, I had this weird evening with him where he was going on to me about this guy called Julien Temple and whatever he was, you know, he didn't use my fucking... It's like, it really bugged him that I didn't use it. I had to tell him I was Julien Temple. Quite difficult. But I love his songs, so I should have used it probably. But you know, the songs have to work for the moment in the film, and actually the one Patsy Kensit wrote was better for the film than it was that song, Having It All, that Elvis did a version of that. It was great. I wrote some lyrics. You know, it's always nice.
In the back?
Do you see a kind of thematic relevance to what's going on nowadays? I mean, the Stephen Burkhoff character is very Trump-like.
Yes, I do. I see. There's lots of prophecy in this film. I mean, you know, gentrification for the nation is. I mean, London. That was the beginning of it, but London is, you know, coming to a complete stop because nurses and teachers can't afford to live there. It's only Uzbek millionaires and billionaires that seem to be able to fought to be there, and this in a way was the beginning of that. But I agree, there is something Trump-like about it. It was a guy called Mosley who was a maniac on the scale of Trump, that came back. He'd been a big player just before the war because he was saying Hitler's great, you know, and he got a bit of traction before the war, and then he came back in the late 50s and said, get these black people out of this country, and went into this area, Notting Hill, which is now kind of primo estate, which was one big rotting slum in the late 50s, and tried to whip up that kind of race hatred to get back in the game, which reminds me a bit of Donald Trump.
I think we actually need to introduce Jazzy for Blue Jean now, which makes me think of the glory days of MTV when we'd actually all sort of stop what we were doing in this sort of long format that's based on a particular song. Can you talk about a little bit about how that came to be and where it was meant to be shown?
Well, it was really David's, he said, I'm not a normal MTV act, I'll do what I want. You know, I want a 20-minute short film and they will play it.
Yeah.
Would you like to write it, direct it, whatever? So I said yes.
Yeah.
But you know, he was always trying to push the boundaries of everything.
Yeah.
And
he makes a great nerd in this. You know, the sad sack version of David Bowie is so adorable in it.
well, the thing that really struck me when I met David Bowie was how normal he was. He wasn't like a, you know, Mick Jagger used to have the diamond in his teeth, and he was a star all the time, day and night. And David seemed to have this ability of being almost lower than your expectations, and then suddenly transform into this incandescent, you know,
Magical being.
Superman. Yeah. It was like he had a phone box, invisible phone box that he could jump into. So it was playing around with this one version of David, which was very real. You know, he was quite a nerd on one level, and then on another level, he was completely transcendent.
On that, Julien, thank you so much for being with us tonight. And now I'm going to head back to Mary to start jazzing for Blue Jean.
Thanks, Julien, and
Thank-
thanks, Phyllis, for
Thanks
the
again for coming.